Today, we take you into a deeper exploration of astrology. We're exploring the asteroid Juno and how you can work with her and different essential oils to understand more about yourself and your relationships. Welcome to this episode. My name is Adam Barralet, and joining me today is Liz. How are you, Liz?
I'm a bit flustered because my printer wouldn't print off my notes. However, you and I have made a contract that you will try not to ask me anything too technical. And since Juno rules contracts, I'm holding you to that.
Oh dear, we're in big trouble. So let's do a little bit of background conversation about why we're looking at Juno in astrology. We know that we have all the major planets that kind of make up the main part of astrology, but in the end part of last century, astrologers started exploring these massive astrological bodies that float between Mars and Jupiter. Now, many of them were given names of gods and goddesses. And as we kind of chart these in your birth chart, we start to understand greater things about yourself. And the biggest one, we've done a video on that. Make sure you check that out on series. And we've got a couple more that we want to do. But we wanted to talk about one of the brightest in the sky in that asteroid belt, and that is Juno. Now, I think to understand the asteroid Juno, we need to kind of understand the goddess first of all. So let's have a bit of a conversation about her. For you, Liz, what's Juno represent for you as a goddess?
So I think there's two different ways of looking at this. The first would be to go down the route of thinking about how Ovid uh, described her, and that was, and she was Jupiter's wife. So Hera, and of course Jupiter is Lord of the skies, King of the gods, ruler of the earth, and she is the divine consort. And within the Roman mind, she is part of the Capitoline triad. So Zeus, Minerva, Juno, all kind of ruled everything to do with Rome between them. And she is like this powerful protectress of the city, but also she is what makes him work. Basically, she's the power behind the throne, and she's kind of an eyes on the prize kind of girl. She decides, well, what is acceptable to me within this marriage, and she's got a very loose rein, to be honest. He gets away with awful things, but she does take a lot of like vengeance. There's a lot of nymphs had a lot of bad experiences because of Juno's bad temper, because she's not nasty in her own right. She's pushed because her husband will not behave himself. So within the Ovid way of thinking, she is this kind of quite a spiteful, vengeful, powerful woman behind the throne, but beloved. I mean, she is, within the Roman religion, she is the most beloved. Women really buy into Juno, and they celebrate her in a big way. And I'll talk about that as we go through. But if you think about her from a more sort of like an older vision of that. Empedocles said she's the air. So he gave each of the different elements a deity who ruled over it, and she was what ruled the air. And of course, that's a play on her on air and Hera, and it's kind of a bit of a pun. But basically, he talks about how she's the atmosphere. And in the old ways of doing things, kind of the way of thinking about it in the it's sort of the Orphic hymns, it was implied that maybe what was happening with the weather and the barometric pressure was the warring of the gods. And so that rain was sort of Neptune and Jupiter smashing together, and so that all of these changes in the atmosphere were to do with wars happening in the skies of the gods. So anything to do with Hera, and then she would become Juno later in the Roman pantheon, is to do with what's going on around you, in the air and in the atmosphere.
Mm. I love what you're saying. I think it would be safe to say that Jupiter or Zeus had a lot of love to give. But one thing that's really interesting, you mentioned that Juno is all about contracts, and one of the contracts that she's most renowned for is the contract of marriage. And what I love about her is, although there are many, many stories of Zeus philandering with different nymphs and young women and goddesses and boys and men and pretty much anything that moved, Juno pretty much stayed, once she was married to Jupiter, she stayed loyal to him as though her word is her bond. But like you said, she wasn't this kind of like, oh, poor me in the corner. Anyone who did kind of not respect the agreement of marriage suffered her wrath. She couldn't control her husband, but she also brought in she maintained and she was the best version of herself in that marriage, even if her husband sometimes was far from it as well, which is really beautiful. Now, as we kind of go into looking at how this applies to the asteroid, this is a really interesting asteroid to look at. And in my online collective, my Living with Nature collective, we've been looking at love asteroids. And Juno can give you a really interesting insight into what you need in love. Now, there are lots of different love asteroids, and in the course that I'm running in my platform at the moment, and the free link for the 7-day trial, if you want to come and do those courses, is just down below. We're looking at 8 different love asteroids. Now, in there, we look at ones of what you're attracted to, things like where Cupid and Eros were where you were born. Also, things that kind of get you a little fiery, things like Vesta can be really good for helping that passion and what turns you on in that way. And then we come to Juno. And Juno's placement in your birth chart will actually explain what you need in a long term partner, what you basically need as a husband or a wife. Now, this can be quite insightful, people are finding, because they may find that, for example, their Eros and their Cupid might be in fire signs or might be in water signs. So they're really drawn to people that are emotionally rich or really fiery and adventurous. But Juno sits in an earth sign. And so, although they're drawn to these exciting and thrilling people, they just fizzle out because what they actually need is something grounded. So, looking up Juno, and if you just kind of Google what is my Juno sign, you can get a really clear indication and dive deeper. And we are doing this right now at the moment in the Living with Nature collective. So, understanding your Juno sign helps you understand an aspect of yourself when it comes to relationships and what you need for a long-term relationship to have legs and support you. And whether that be communication is really important, or stability, or spark, or emotional connection, your Juno sign gives you this beautiful indication for this as well. Now, there is something else that will happen once a year, pretty much most years, is as with planets, Juno will go into retrograde. And this is when relationships, not necessarily romantic, but it can be, but other partnerships as well, will be tested. And there is a Juno retrograde test that I give to everyone every year. And I'm going to encourage you to do the same. And we're going to talk about some essential oils after that. They're going to support you with that as well. So, what tends to happen? I want you to think about the relationships that you're in or that you've been in the past. And, our partner forgets to pick up something from the shop or they say something that's kind of a little bit hurtful. And what do? We tend to start going into point scoring. We're like, ooh, how dare you do that? Well, okay, I'm not going to do that because you didn't do that. And then there's this point scoring thing. And because Juno can kind of show you any relationship that maybe not isn't exactly serving its long-term purpose, there can be this tendency, especially during a Juno retrograde, to start getting into this, well, if they're not going to, I'm not going to. And this is kind of not doing what Juno would do. If Juno was to treat Zeus like that or Jupiter like that, she'd be sleeping with everyone else as well. But she didn't. She remained loyal to her word and she gave the relationship its best. And so the Juno retrograde challenge is to, if a relationship seems to be suffering, rather than drawing back, give the relationship your best. And then when it does, after Juno retrograde finishes, if that relationship and that other person is still not coming to the party when you've given it your all rather than giving it your half-assed attempt, then it's probably safe to say it may not be the best relationship for you, either romantically, professionally, platonically or whatever that can be. And so that's a really beautiful thing I love to do with working with that Juno energy.
I love that. And she, as I say, she rules the air, she rules contracts, she rules boundaries. And the did you realise that Juno went into retrograde in Libra, which is her ruling sign, uh, at exactly the same time as the lockdowns in 2020? So you can map it almost exactly. So if you think about that from a medical, like astrology kind of point of view, first of all, we all kind of we had to social distance. And actually, I should say, so let's just go, we rewind a little bit. She went retrograde and she was also in a square to Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter. So Saturn is authority, Pluto is transformation, but also viruses. And Jupiter is expansion, very fast expansion. So if you were to look back at that and you could say, right, okay, well, there was a virus, it was COVID-19. We were given authoritarian demands that restricted our boundaries. They said social distancing and they locked us away. In the UK, we were locked in bubbles and we were told you can't go out or you can't associate really with anybody outside of that bubble. So within that retrograde, what you've got is being pushed away from everybody else except for your bubble, which was the marital unit usually. What you got to feel sorry for is those people who maybe had only just been in a relationship for 2 or 3 weeks. They were in the heart of lust and decided we're going to bubble together, and then suddenly this Juno like lesson is coming down on them like a ton of bricks. You're really going to learn about this person, and Juno really is represented by your commitment, your soul contracts. But what are the things that you will compromise on in a relationship? What's acceptable, what's not? And we really, really saw that. And of course, as we came out of the lockdown, which was almost exactly when she went direct, because she was in Libra for a really long time because of this retrograde. Libra, of course, is about balance, about fairness, and Juno's about what's fair, what's equal within a relationship. As she went direct, we were able to come out of social distancing again and start to breathe the air with other people again and to loosen that lock. So I think what you say is absolutely fascinating when you look at it from the point of view of actually having seen it historically at a time where, as we came out of lockdown, what happened with the divorce rates? They went, I don't want to be married to this person anymore. I was pushed too far, you know? It was really, really interesting.
Yeah. Now let's have a bit of a conversation about some essential oils that can help you to work with Juno and her astrology, and the different things that can happen in love and marital relationships. Of course, these days you don't necessarily have to be married. I think any de facto or committed relationship kind of comes under that governance of Juno as well. Although Juno would want you to get married just because she's a bit of a traditionalist like that. But the first essential oil that I love for Juno is actually blue lotus. It's a flower that is sacred to her a little bit, but blue lotus is an oil that teaches us emotional mastery. And no goddess has better emotional mastery probably than Juno, because this is a flower that sits above the water. It's not, it grows out of the water, so it rises above the emotional realm, but is undisturbed by the turbulent waters down below. We also know that a lotus flower is aquaphobic, so it repels other liquids. So it doesn't allow the emotions of others or the emotions of the world to kind of um, bother you and distill you from what you were dedicated to. The reason I feel that blue lotus and all the lotus flowers are so sacred is purely because they allow us to not be affected by people's bad opinions, good opinions, comments and all that type of thing. And so we stay so aligned with who we are as a person. And Juno is very much about your word is your bond. And, there are contracts we sign with other people, but there are also words we give to ourselves. And Blue Lotus allows you to do that and remain tethered to your spirituality. So I think when working with Juno and looking about what you will put up with, as Liz was referring to, and what you won't put up with, your boundaries. Blue Lotus gives us an ability to do that in an empowered way, in a spiritual way, and in a way where you are in control rather than you handing over control to other people as well. So I love working with Blue Lotus when I'm working with Juno.
Do you think she had emotional mastery? I think she was completely emotionally repressed.
You reckon? In what way?
Well, she lets him get away with everything.
Yeah. Well,
If you said to me, right, who is the modern day Juno? I'd say Melania. Like without power, completely without power in her own right, she doesn't. She is sovereign as long as she does what he says.
yeah, but then remember that pretty much anyone who slept with Zeus ended up turning into stone or an animal.
This is true. This is
Yeah.
true, and she didn't.
So
And she
I, I,
didn't. All right.
I do love your analogy of Melania Trump, and I was for a minute like, yeah, that's spot on. But Melania Trump isn't going around the back door and punishing um, anyone who has relationship. I don't. I hope Trump's not having affairs, kind of thing. One lady is enough that to be tortured in this world. Um,
I,
but but do you know what I
I
mean?
think
Like she would. I guess the difference between Melania Trump and Juno is Juno was you just slept with my husband. You're now a frog. You're now a bird. You're now stone. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Well, okay. So what I will say is that she she was owner of. So you said earlier that you felt that she was a traditionalist and she would want you to get married.
Mm-hmm.
So in Roman times, she was guardian of a contract called the conubarium, which was what was cited when you got married, and that gave you the legal. Not only the legal right not only to be married but also to bear children. And she is Juno Lucina. She is the goddess who brings the baby into the world. So she's like the midwife goddess, which is strange because she starts to kind of, after a while, it seems to start to sound a bit like Ceres, I have to say. But she's the midwife goddess, and she's Lucina because she is the light that the baby perceives when it comes into the world. And of course, she is the air it breathes as it comes out. So she does have it's not really that she wants you to get married. She bloody insists that you get married because otherwise you can't have children, you can't have a partner. That's just not what's going to happen. Um, but what Lucina insists on is flow. So do you know about the obsession of Juno with knots?
No, I haven't heard that reference.
Okay, so when Hercules was born, she was invited to the birth, but she was like, "No, I don't want him to be born because presumably, I guess she's Zeus's child. Can't remember." But anyway, she sits outside and she's got her fingers knotted like this, and one of the servants perceives and goes, oh, "Okay." She's holding the uterus closed. She's actually got the power to do that. So he says, "The child is born." And she goes, "What?" And then suddenly the child can be born. So within the cult of Hera, knots are not allowed. The only time that there is a knot is the knot of Hercules, which is a really specific knot that's tied in the belt of the bride. And the groom has to untie that knot of Hercules in bed at night, and then that opens the womb that she will be able to bear children. But when you go and if her festival is the 1st of March called Matronalia. It's kind of Mother's Day, but it's for her. And the men obviously say worship her, but they also worship the wives and say thank you for everything. And you had to brush your hair till there was no knots. And nobody was allowed to wear knots. And when a child was born, there could be no knots. So nobody could have knots in their belts or knots in their hair or tying knots because that would constrict the womb. So for her, her most important thing is A, flow, and B, divine timing. So that was a really long way to get to the fact that you're quite right about the blue lotus sitting above the water, but she would say, no, no, that's still water. I want flowing water. So she would
Mm.
insist on flow. So to me, I think another way of looking at that might be Cyprus, because Cyprus is all about flow, is it not?
Yeah, very much so. It could be. Yeah, that could be another one to work really well with her. So I'm stuck on this idea of this knot of Hercules, and I think about how many people struggle to just get a bra strap, or the clip of the bra undone, let alone having to sit there with a fiddly little bloody knot. I'd give up and
Well,
go to bed.
I can feel, yeah, I can feel like the rabbit hole opening of going. I can see I've got to go and search out a knot of Hercules and learn to tie a knot of Hercules and become obsessed with the knot of Hercules. But yeah, it was really fundamental to their cult of birth, of marriage, of everything. This knot, yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Another essential oil that I really love for Hera or for Juno is rose. Now, rose I've talked about before. Rose is this definitive oil and flower of love. But for me, it's not just about love, it's about unconditional love. And how she showed that love wasn't probably the most romantic way, but I do believe that Juno did love Jupiter. She supported him, but she loved him for who he was rather than who she wanted him to be. She was always his consort and always there. She didn't leave. She never broke that word of marriage. And Rose helps us to do that. Rose is this amazing one. Like all flowers, they open us up in one way or another to love people for who they are rather than who we want them to be. So think about how often, again, we get disappointed by people because it's not because they're necessarily doing something negative, because right and wrong are human constructs and concepts, and we just decide what's good and what's bad, and then we try and get other people to agree with us. But what Rose says is when we get disappointed with someone, it's purely because they're not behaving how we expect them to. They should remember to get that thing from the shop. They should remember my birthday. They should give me a kiss when they walk in the door. Who says? And so Rose helps you to kind of give people the freedom, love someone for who they are. Don't allow those disappointments to come because they don't fulfill your obligations. And if you give people the freedom to be who they are, that also grants you the permission to stop trying to people please everyone, to have your own strong boundaries and go, this is who I am. And I was reading this beautiful poem. I should have printed it out and I would have read it now, but it's basically saying you will find someone one day who will love every part of you for who you are. And so you don't have to try and be someone else. And that applies, I think, in romance, but in life as well. And so I think Rose and Blue Lotus, especially when they're combined together, bring this really strong, empowered way of being in love and for tackling relationships with a mature way without getting swept up in all the drama that we see on some of the reality TV shows and where we think it has to be dramatic and it has to be disempowering. I think Rose and Blue Lotus together can be quite empowering and bring in that Juno energy.
Yeah, oh, it's got to be Rose, hasn't it? And I really like. I always go to this one scientific experiment that I always found absolutely fascinating, and I think that it sums up Rose so much. That they did an experiment on some little mice or rats, can't remember which, but what they found was that the rose really gave them an anti-conflict quality. So they'd had something. I think they'd had something engineered with nitric oxide in these poor little rodents, and so they were fighting, fighting, fighting all of the time. Really, sort of going for supremacy, and they were vicious. They would fight to the death. And then when Rose came in, they were just like, okay, settle down in the corner, go to sleep. It was hypnotic, and they stopped fighting. And I think that within the realm of this lecture, that's a really good recommendation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The final oil that I think is a nice one to bring in to kind of bring up, we talked about quite heaviness in that aspect of Blue Lotus and Rose and what we talked about Juno so far. You know, she is the goddess of marriage and a plant that kind of has that connection to that excitement and that joy of marriage. So it's not an obligation, it is a blessing as well and something exciting. The oil myrtle. Myrtle is often used, it has a bit more of a maiden energy about it. I think it's one that promotes the beauty of connection. Leaves were often soaked in water and then spritzed over the face and through the hair to make what's called angel water to allow you to be beautiful. So I think if you want to capture that kind of joyousness of marriage and that aspect of Juno, then I'd bring in a bit of myrtle as well.
That's interesting. You've got a really different way of describing marriage to me. Interesting that I'm the one that's coming up to 25 years married. But I think in terms of boundaries, she is the sentinel. In actual fact, if I were to say, right, if I'd got to make an argument for Myrtle, I would say that she's the peacock eyes. So Juno's like signature bird was the peacock. If I remember rightly, Hercules slew Argus, and Argus was this creature with 100 eyes. She took out all of the eyes, put them on the peacock, and then this peacock could see everything everywhere. And if I was to say there was an oil that could do that, I would say myrtle was the thing to do that. So I think that's a good recommendation for different reasons to you, but I think it's a good one. Yeah.
I'm so glad you did bring up the peacock. I think probably one of the strongest symbols of Juno is the peacock. And obviously, this is an essential oil podcast, not a animal one. But if we were talking about animals associated with her, then you'd have to talk about the peacock. You know, it's not just about that beauty; it is about that all-seeingness of all the different eyes, and even protection because you see all as well. And it was, it didn't matter where Zeus went. Hera was probably watching what was happening, or Juno was watching what was happening in that time. And I think the peacock energy kind of comes in really beautifully. So
Yeah,
let's
and
talk.
I think.
Oh, go on.
Go on. I was going to say, and don't forget, you're talking about her as the personification of the divine marriage, but she's also the boundaries of the city. So the peacock on the boundaries of the city that she's watching. That's why she's the city's protectress. And what's really interesting, actually, is we've said how she's like the air and she's the weather and barometric pressure. Well, peacocks actually do perceive that. They will bring their tail down when there's going to be a storm coming, and people can say, "Oh, there's a storm coming. Look what the peacock's done." So that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, wow. I didn't realize that. That is cool.
There's a lot happening in the world right now. There's wars, there's financial pressures, there's health concerns, and all of this can be quite overwhelming. Just open up social media and you're going to be subjected with all these different things which can kind of drag you into more and more gloom. I've been reflecting on this recently, and then I think about when I just step out my own back door and immerse myself in nature. Nature helps us to find peace, harmony, and to put everything into perspective. Recently, I've wanted to try and help people to engage a bit more with nature through different gifts of nature, such as essential oils and crystals and so on. But being able to stretch out and reach people that way is often through that overwhelming social media. So I've come up with a solution. I've created a collective, a community where we can all gather and we can share our experiences with our oils, with our crystals, with nature, as the animals sing and dance and talk to us in different ways. And I'd like to invite you to join this community. It's called the Living with Nature Collective, and it is available to you to come in and interact and meet like-minded people. Our life is generated by what we give attention to, and it's time to start giving more attention to nature in a way that you're not surrounded by other barrages of information. I'd like to offer you a 7-day free trial for my new collective, and if you look at the link below, you can click today and check it out. Come in, introduce yourself, meet other people, and be able to experience live classes, pre-recorded classes, conversations, polls, work out what's happening astrologically, what crystals are the best for you right now, and have your questions answered by me and other experts as well. I'm really excited to launch this new initiative of the Living with Nature Collective, so please check out the link below, Come say hi, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Let's have a bit of a discussion about the medical astrology. Talk to me about it.
It's complicated, I have to say. So I alluded to the fact that it has a rulership of Libra, and I was like, wait, what? How does it have a rulership of Libra? And this goes back to the 1970s when Demetra George and a lady called Eleanor Batch, whose work I have not come across before, but she has nothing to do with Bachelor remedies before anybody else. She's an American lady, and they both felt that the asteroids had been discovered sort of a good 150 years hence, but nothing had been done with them. So they really sort of delved down into the asteroids. And George looked and said, do you know, I really don't think that Venus as a ruler really talks about marriage. It talks about the divine spark, but it doesn't really talk about what it takes to keep a marriage going, you know. So this kind of like Venus seems to be the maiden aspect, but I think Juno, it makes sense, it's pretty obvious to me why she would pick Juno as what it takes. So this is like the soul contract and commitment. And for the same reason, we have like this Venus rulership of the reproductive system, but also this rules, Juno rules reproduction. And also the thyroid, but I'll talk about that independently in a minute. And if I forget, remind me to come back to it. But in particular, it rules the reproductive system in the way of, are you going to provide me with a child? And so this is like the mechanics of the reproductive system. And remember what I said about how she is divine timing. Am I going to conceive? Am I going to give birth? When are the moments that I'm going to conceive? When are the moments that I'm going to give birth? And as I say, she is Lucina, Juno, Lucina. She is what brings the baby out into the time. So it rules the mechanics of the system, but also it rules like psychosomatic illness based on your stress in a relationship. So if you think about the stress of I can't get pregnant, or the sort of inflammations, the rashes and things that come upon the body, if you're stressed because your partner's playing out. So it's kind of this dynamic of here I am in this place and everything that's going on around me, the boundaries, the air, is going to affect me as an organic entity, and this is how my body will react. That's what it rules, which is very complicated. But so it's kind of the body's contract with the environment, and whether this is fair or it's not fair, whether it's equal or it's not equal. And coming back to the thyroid, the reason why it rules the thyroid is also because Juno rules the voice, and in particular of saying, you did what? You know, of speaking up and being able to express, I am really annoyed at what you've done, rather than suppressing that, which is why I kind of went, well, I think she suppresses. And so this inability to be able to express dissatisfaction at the equality, and this sort of suppression affects the thyroid. And so when we think about how stress actually works within the body, what it will fundamentally attack is the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. And particularly the pituitary, what we're going to see is when there's real bad stress, the pituitary goes, okay, I'm going to send loads of my power to the adrenals, and I'm not going to look after the fertile parts of the body. And so those fertility parts come down. So that was, again, a long way of getting to the sort of two main oils that I think are most important if you've got that kind of transit going through with Juno, or particularly like oppositions, would be time. Not just because of divine timing, but time, and the other one is Vitex Agnes Castor, so chaste berry. both of those have a real deep connection with progesterone in the body. And so if somebody needs to get pregnant, they have to have the correct length of cycle. They need the divine timing. And I don't think I think in today's day and age, we'll often talk about how the moon rules menstruation. Well, I think that the bigger overarching thing is that the correct cycle length will be 29 days, which is the moon's cycle. And if one doesn't have a cycle that's around about 29 days long, what happens is the egg comes down, and then I don't know if you know, the body makes progesterone, but most of the progesterone needed for sustaining a baby is actually it's not a shell, but the eggshell. The eggshell breaks down and creates progesterone, and it creates a substrate that can sustain a pregnancy. If that it's called a luteal phase. If that luteal phase isn't long enough for the progesterone to build up enough, then pregnancy will fail. So that divine timing of getting that corpus luteal phase right is fundamental to a Juno transit if somebody wants to get pregnant. And two oils that would be best to do that are thyme and Vitex agnus castus. Now, what's really extraordinary is Vitex agnus castus is really the most important plant to Juno. So I'm going to say Samos. I won't say Samoa, but that can't be right. So Samos. There was a ritual where they would take the statue down to be bathed in the water. It's called the Tonaya. And there's lots of these rituals for different goddesses. There was Plintrea for the Athena on the Acropolis, but at Tonaya, she's taken down into the water. She's all cleaned off. Her boundaries are cleaned. Think about all the how she's picked up all the pollution off the air. So each year, and then she's bound to a Lygos tree, which is Vitex agnus castus. And so this is really, really important to her ritual. So that would be the two main oils I would pick for her, as well as black spruce, because black spruce is so good for the thyroid gland.
Yeah. So you wanted to expand a little bit more on the thyroid, or did you get everything in about the thyroid?
No, I think I got in what I wanted to say, really. We could go really hormonal in terms of like T3, T4 and when they're supposed to go. But the crux of it is that the thyroid really responds to, have I said what I'm supposed to say? And I know somebody who has kind of the partner's not a philanderer, but he's really goddamn useless, and his wife never says a word, and funnily enough, she has got a really bad thyroid gland, and I'm like, well, that's exactly what the medical astrology says. Exactly that.
Fascinating. So I think, Juno is, she may not be one of the most spectacular goddesses when it comes to, ruling the moon and the sun or animals and all that kind of thing. And really, there aren't a lot of stories where she's kind of plays this really prominent part. But I think that stability of a marriage, just like sometimes after 20, 25 years, a marriage can get a bit kind of stable and maybe not the most exciting thing in your life, but it is a really key part. And I think just covering her astrology, understanding her sign, looking at the medical astrology and bringing in these essential oils, things like blue lotus, rose, myrtle, thyme, vitex, I think can be really beautiful, even cypress as well. So we would love to know, have you looked at this astrology before? What you've noticed when you look up your Juno sign? Pop that in the comments. And are there oils that you find really resonate for you and Juno, or give one of ours a try and let us know how you go. We'll be back very, very soon to talk about another amazing asteroid that gives us another insight to feminine archetypes within us, regardless of who we are. Until then, take care and blessed be.
Bye-bye.
I'm Elizabeth Ashley, UK Director for the National Association of Holistic Aromatherapy and founder of the Aromatic Mystery School, where essential oils meet the deeper more mystical side of healing. Here you'll explore the spiritual, emotional, and energetic dimensions of plants and learn how to weave them into your own rituals and well-being practices. If you're ready to work in a way that nourishes both your soul and your senses, join us at the Aromatic Mystery School. The link's right below.
Life moves fast. There's constant noise, urgency, and pressure, and so much happening in the world right now that can leave you feeling depressed, drained, defeated. Somewhere amongst all the noise, you feel a quiet calling within, suggesting that something is missing. Like you've drifted away from what really matters. But nature hasn't gone anywhere. She's still there, waiting for you to return. That's why the Living with Nature Collective exists. A global, interactive community of like-minded people. Your tribe. Discover how to return to living in flow with the seasons, blossoming, shining, releasing and pausing with the land. Each week, you'll discover simple ways to connect with crystals, essential oils, astrology, the moon, animal wisdom, angels, and more. If you've been looking for something, you've found it. Step back into the garden, the forest, the ocean. Join the Living with Nature Collective today.